That's Life Unlimited. Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. A federal judge in Washington has released new court filings painting the clearest picture yet of the 2020 election conspiracy case against Donald Trump. In a 165-page court filing, special counsel Jack Smith argues that Trump took actions in a private capacity to overturn the election results. Smith was forced to refile his case after the Supreme Court's immunity ruling earlier this year. Israel is vowing to respond after Iran launched its largest ever attack on Israel Tuesday. Iran fired nearly 200 ballistic missiles into the region in response to the killings of a Hezbollah chief and Hamas political leader. This while Israeli forces and Iran-backed Hezbollah fighters have started to fight on the ground in southern Lebanon. President Joe Biden saying Israel has the right to respond.
We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond.
Both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris traveled to the southeastern U.S. Wednesday to see Hurricane Helene's devastation firsthand. Biden traveled to the Carolinas, where he did an aerial tour of the damage, while Kamala Harris visited Georgia. The storm's death toll has climbed to at least 180, with that number expected to rise even more. Here's your weather on the ones.
Here's what you need to know over the next few days. Well, the heat, that's continuing across parts of the west. We have heat advisories as well as excessive heat warnings. Still a few showers in the Midwest and in the east as there's a front that's moving through. And we are keeping an eye on the tropics. We are still in hurricane season and a few areas that we're watching very closely. As we're looking at the big picture, we see those few showers moving through parts of the Northeast with that cold front, but otherwise fairly dry across much of the country.
New developments regarding a legal case against former President Donald Trump. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sharon Tazwell. Never before disclosed evidence in Donald Trump's election subversion case just made public by a federal judge. A 165-page court document from special counsel Jack Smith is the most detailed account yet of the 2020 election case. Smith says the former president worked to overturn the 2020 election results by, quote, resorting to crimes to try and stay in office. Spectrum's Evan Kozloff joins us now from Washington with more on these newly unsealed court papers. Evan, what are we learning?
Well, Sharon, we're just starting to read through this new filing. It is massive. We're talking about 165 pages. Essentially, the purpose of this filing is for the prosecutors to argue to the judge that Trump's actions were private acts, not official. Because remember, because of that Supreme Court ruling, presidents are now considered immune to prosecution if it relates to official acts. So let's get into the juice of this briefing. Prosecutors argue that Trump, quote, resorted to crimes after losing the 2020 election, including when he tried to persuade his then Vice President, Mike Pence, to stand in the way of the counting of the electoral votes on January 6. Prosecutors say that this was not an official act because it was done as a candidate for president. Let's read you a little bit about what the prosecutors had to say. Quote, although the defendant was the incumbent president during the charged conspiracies, his scheme was fundamentally a private one. Prosecutors also wrote that the, quote, steady stream of disinformation is what culminated in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Sharon?
All right, Evan. So what is the former president and his campaign saying about this new filing?
Well, as he's done before, Trump responded by calling this a witch hunt. On social media, he wrote in part, "Trump is dominating the election cycle, leading in the polls, and the radical Democrats throughout the deep state are totally freaking out. This entire case is a partisan, unconstitutional witch hunt that should be dismissed entirely, just like the Florida case was dismissed." His campaign is also firing back against this filing, calling the special counsel deranged and, quote, hell-bent on weaponizing the Justice Department. Sharon?
All right, Evan Kozloff in Washington. Thanks.
Thank you.
Israel is now weighing how to retaliate after Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israeli targets. The Iranian attack was a response to the killings of a Hezbollah chief and the political leader of Hamas. President Joe Biden says Israel has a right to answer the missile strikes, but says he hopes the response does not broaden the conflict. Our Daniel Grimes has more from Washington.
President Joe Biden on Wednesday vowed new sanctions on Iran as U.S. and Israeli leaders mull how to respond to the approximately 180 missiles Iran launched toward Israel on Tuesday. The president did not provide much insight into those conversations, but did say he does not support an attack on Iran's nuclear research sites.
They have a right to respond, but they should respond in proportion.
The Iranian attacks were largely thwarted by Israeli and U.S. interceptors, but there is concern about what comes next. Iran is warning any response from Israel will lead to broader strikes, although the timing, scale, and scope of a response are still being determined. Israel's prime minister says the bottom line is that Iran made a big mistake and will pay.
The regime in Iran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate against our enemies.
As the world waits, Israel's ground operation into Lebanon is growing. The Israeli military announced Wednesday it is sending additional troops to participate in what it's calling a limited incursion targeting Hezbollah's infrastructure. It also announced the death of 8 soldiers in that combat. The U.S. ambassador to the UN is emphasizing Israel's right to respond while calling for tensions to ease.
The Iranian regime will be held responsible for its actions, and we strongly warn against Iran or its proxies taking actions against the United States or for their actions against Israel.
Now, when Iran attacked Israel in April, Israel responded with a very limited counterattack, hitting an air defense battery at an Iranian air base. Iran's attack Tuesday was far broader than what it did back in the spring, and so Israel is expected to expand its retaliation as well. Now, whether Israel's latest counterattack ends this current cycle of tit-for-tat reactions remains to be seen. In Washington, Daniel Grimes, Spectrum News.
The Jewish New Year begins Wednesday at sundown. While Israel is involved in conflicts on several fronts, the holiday comes at a time when the Jewish community in the U.S. is facing more anti-Semitism. Spectrum's Ariel Wessler joins me now with a look at how the community is reacting. Ariel, this is already an emotional time for many Jews in the U.S. What can you tell us?
Well, Sharon, they're known as the High Holidays, which starts with Rosh Hashanah on Wednesday night and runs through Yom Kippur on October 12th. That 10-day period between them, often referred to as the Days of Awe or Days of Atonement. It's a time of celebration, introspection, and reflection. But as you might imagine, this year they will take an even more somber tone because they also coincide with the one-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack that killed 1,200 Israelis and triggered the ongoing war in the Middle East. Nolan Leibovitz is the senior rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom in Los Angeles. He says Jews are going through a transition period, but the community remains resilient.
I would hope that that as the American Jewish community goes through holidays like this, that our friends and neighbors are supportive and understanding and learn the same lessons from these events as we do.
Ariel, the FBI recently released its 2023 hate crime report. What did the report reveal for the Jewish community?
So, Sharon, Jewish Americans make up around 2% of the U.S. population, yet anti-Semitic hate crimes accounted for more than 15% of all hate crimes reported by the FBI in its 2023 report. And there's a growing anxiety among many Jews about a rise in anti-Semitism. The report found Jews were the most targeted religious group in 2023, with more than 1,800 anti-Jewish incidents, accounting for a little more than 2/3, 67% of all religiously motivated hate crimes, according according to the FBI. Overall, the report also found Jewish hate crimes jumped nearly 63%. So hate crimes against Jews jumped nearly 63% from 2022 to 2023, the highest number recorded in almost 30 years. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Jewish hate was already surging prior to October 7th.
It's not the first time we've seen conflict between Israel and say Hamas or Gaza animate anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. What we have never seen is it at this level. And essentially the Jewish community is taking it from all angles.
If there's any silver lining to all of this, both men I spoke with believe that this will all make the community more resilient. Sharon?
All right, Ariel Wessler in California. Thanks. Our Front Porch Politics anchor Tim Boehm is on the road speaking to voters. What they're saying following last night's VP debate. That's just ahead, right here on Spectrum News.
The 2024 election will decide who leads our nation and the balance of power in Congress, impacting all of us. From Capitol Hill to the Oval Office, let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth coverage with our dedicated experts in local politics. Strengthening democracy by informing your community. That's our mission. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
What if you never had to worry about what you could do? Because you could do anything. Anywhere could be the center. So the only limit you faced was how big you could dream. What would you do then? Some pretty cool stuff, I bet. Yeah, that'd be some life. That'd be life unlimited.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable. The sad reality is fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kids should know.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
Welcome back to your Weather on the Ones. I'm meteorologist Brittany Hamilton. As we're taking a look at satellite and radar, there's really not a whole lot going on here. We do have a cold front that's pushing through parts of the Northeast, and some of those showers making it through the mid-Atlantic as well, but that helped to push that low, the remnants of Helene, well off the coast. So we're finally done with that. A couple of showers down in Florida and a few showers in Montana, but otherwise fairly quiet across much of the country. And as we look ahead through the next few hours going into Thursday and Thursday evening, quiet across parts of the Northeast. So that front comes in, really doesn't do a whole lot, and then it is out of here after that. Could see a few more showers moving through parts of Michigan as we get into Friday, but otherwise still just some cloud cover and some showers potentially near the Appalachian Mountains across Virginia and getting into the Carolinas. Now out west, not talking about rain, we are talking about dry conditions and heat. That is the big story. So you're noticing some orange showing up here, as well as this pinkish red color. This does indicate that we have heat advisories. That's what's in orange. So you notice that for San Francisco, some excessive heat warnings as well across parts of the valley and central California and surrounding Los Angeles. So actual temperatures may get into the 90s. We could have some spots potentially in the triple digits. So you do want to limit time outdoors if you can, especially during the middle of the day where temperatures tend to be the hottest. 89 degrees for Thursday in LA. LA, 84 in San Francisco, but some of those surrounding valleys probably going to get into the mid-90s, maybe even closer to 100, 109 for Phoenix, and some of the heat building into parts of the Central Plains as well, close to 90 in Kansas City for Thursday, 92 in Dallas, 78 degrees in Chicago. And as we look toward the end of the week for Friday, still going to be pretty hot across parts of Southern California, 86 there, 110 in Phoenix, but we do see a little bit of a cool down in Kansas City.
President Joe Biden headed to North Carolina Wednesday to take an aerial tour of the devastation left in the wake of Hurricane Helene. Some towns in the state's western mountains remain virtually isolated, with most roads and bridges in the region still impassable. Spectrum's Carla Redditt joins me now from our North Carolina newsroom with the latest. Carla.
Well, Sharon, President Biden is here in North Carolina getting a look at the widespread damage as well as a briefing on the ground on the recovery efforts. Here's a look at him arriving in Raleigh, North Carolina Wednesday afternoon. Now, this followed his aerial tour of the state, which included Asheville, Swannanoa, Black Mountain, Chimney Rock, and Lake Lure. Cities and towns now made up of flattened buildings, fallen trees, and homes still underwater. The president having to view this from the air as so many roads are flooded. Now, many of the people who live in these areas have likened Helene's aftermath to a war zone. Officials have described it as post-apocalyptic. Now, the president is expected to head to Georgia and Florida Thursday. Sharon?
And Carla, before heading to North Carolina, he ordered the deployment of 1,000 troops to help in recovery efforts.
He certainly did. The White House made the announcement this morning. Those troops will be deployed from Fort Liberty in eastern North Carolina. And the president says their jobs will be to support the delivery of food, water, and other critical commodities. They will join members of the National Guard who have already been working in the region with airlifts and supply drops to communities hit hard by Helene. Sharon?
So much devastation there. Carla Redditt, thanks. Vice President Kamala Harris arriving in Augusta, Georgia Wednesday to visit the hurricane zone for a briefing on the federal response to Hurricane Helene. This trip was in her official capacity as vice president. She also took time to meet with storm victims and hands out meals at a community center. She says the federal government is by their side.
The president and I have been paying close attention from the beginning to what we need to do to make sure the federal resources hit the ground as quickly as possible. And that includes what was necessary to make sure that we provided direct federal assistance. And that work has been happening.
On Monday, former President Trump visited and received a briefing on the damage in Georgia as well. He greeted victims and thanked the first responders for the work they're doing. Political anchor Tim Boyum's Front Porch Politics Across America continues into day 3. He's traveling from New York City to Los Angeles, stopping in 5 battleground states along the way to talk with voters. Now, we last spoke to Tim in Michigan, where he spoke to voters there, and now he joins us from the road in Wisconsin. Tim, how is the Tesla holding up, and what are voters saying about the vice presidential debate?
Yeah, the car's doing well. We just charged it, actually. Usually charge it about 2-3 times a day. Probably adds on about an hour and a half to our day. But so far, it's been a pretty good ride. From the voters' perspective, they're pretty charged, too, ready for the election to be here. We talked to independent voters in Michigan. We're going to Wisconsin, as you mentioned. Both states have flip-flopped from Democrat to Republican and back in the last 2 elections. Less than 3%, often less than 1% separating the candidates. So literally every voter counts in this. And we thought we'd be talking about grocery prices and immigration, but really they're talking about issues like character and who they think is actually going to fulfill promises. And they're tired of the bipartisan bickering that's going on. Everybody's at fault for it. So we talked to them today, Michigan independent voters, about the debate last night, and frankly, they were not impressed.
Last night, we saw time and time again both candidates would start way off in terms of their talking points, and maybe toward the end in their 2 minutes start answering the question, or mostly never did.
I was very disappointed because of the lack of fact-checking. J.D. Vance stood up there and basically lied the whole way through.
I chose not to watch it, so I can't really say.
Why?
Because I I thought I knew enough about each of the characters.
So that gentleman said he knows about those two characters, but he did say that he believes Kamala Harris still has work to do on her own policy front, so people know more about exactly what she wants. So I think both candidates still have a lot of work to do in these states where literally every vote counts. We're now headed to Madison. We're going to talk to some dairy farmers. The the World Dairy Expo is taking place there, and farmers have been struggling all across the country. So another big issue there across America. Sharon.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to hear what they have to say. All right, Tim Boyum, thanks.
Yeah.
Students are getting a crash course on how to save a life. Coming up on Spectrum News, what they're learning in EpiPen training.
For the millions of school-age children across the country, the state of their schools can have a lasting impact on their health and well-being.
The majority of school districts aren't doing comprehensive regular water quality testing.
As CO2 levels rise in a space, cognitive function takes a direct decline.
We visit 2 school districts working to create safe and healthy environments for their students.
Watch Exploring Your Health, Curing Our Classrooms. Available on the Spectrum News app.
Never have to worry about thinking too big? Because you have a connection that's ready for anything. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
I tell my son, I love you every single day. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now that he's a grandfather, he says, I love you to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
Food isn't just fuel to live, it's fuel to grow. My family relied on public assistance to help provide meals for us. These meals fueled my involvement in theater and the arts as a child, which fostered my love for acting. The Feeding America network of food banks helps millions of people put food on the table. When people are fed, futures are nourished. Join the movement to end hunger, and together we can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Visit feedingamerica.org/act now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm meteorologist Brittany Hamilton. As we're looking at our fire weather alerts, what you're seeing here in this bright color, these are red flag warnings. So dry air, very low relative humidity, and windy conditions. Some of the wind gusts in some of these spots in Wyoming, as well as South Dakota and Nebraska, some of the gusts getting up to 35, maybe even 40 miles per hour. So you definitely don't want to be doing any outdoor burning, but any existing fires could be easily spread with that dry air and breezy conditions going on. And you notice not much in the way of rain, obviously, across the plains, but really a lot of the U.S. There's not a lot of rain. We've had those few showers moving through parts of the East Coast with a cold front, but we are going to be looking at some heat once again for parts of California. The heat risk potential, you're talking about major to extreme in some spots, so we are concerned about maybe some heat-related illnesses in some folks if you're planning to be out, if you're running, especially if you're doing anything during the middle of the day. That is not a great time to do it. Also think about your pets. Maybe if you can walk your dog early in the day or very late in the evening, those are going to be better times. Now, as we look at our futurecast, in terms of rainfall, I will say that as we look at that front pushing through as we go through Friday, another system coming in for the west, so Seattle likely getting in on some rain as we end the week and head into the weekend. But you start to notice in the Gulf, there's a lot of green showing up here, and there is more moisture developing there. And that actually brings us to our tropical update as we're keeping an eye on an area that could potentially form in the Gulf. Now, it's not guaranteed that we're going to see this become a tropical system, but it does look like at least that it will bring some rain to parts of the Gulf region. Right now, we just have disorganized areas of thunderstorms, with the National Hurricane Center keeping an eye on this area, giving it a moderate chance of development over the next 5 to 7 days. So this is something we'll be looking at as we go into the weekend and into early next week. But if it does get its act together, moves through some very warm water, temperatures in the 80s, we could see some development there. But right now, it looks like there are going to be a few things working against it, like a front coming in that kind of keeps it a little bit dry. Now, this is Hurricane Kirk. That does look a lot more impressive than it has over the past couple of days, but that's expected to stay out to sea. So we're really not concerned about any impacts from Kirk as it moves back out into the open waters.
The Federal Aviation Administration is making hiring air traffic controllers easier amid a shortage. Well, graduates of air traffic control programs at Tulsa Community College and the University of Oklahoma can now bypass the FAA's training academy. The FAA says the schools provide the same thorough curriculum as the academy. Many air traffic controllers have been working 6-day weeks of mandatory overtime due to staffing shortages, as fatigued workers have been cited as a factor in multiple runway incidents. 10 years ago, a Wisconsin mother lost her 18-year-old son to a severe allergic reaction from a bee sting. She now works to make sure no other mom experiences this. She leads training on identifying the signs of severe allergic reaction and administering life-saving medications. Spectrum's Nathan Phelps takes us to one of those trainings.
For the past decade, Angel Miller has been educating others in the use and availability of epinephrine to help people facing severe allergic reactions. The Mishicot resident is doing it for her son, Dylan.
Us doing this training in his memory, it's keeping his memory alive and his story alive, but it's also something where change comes from.
Dylan died from a severe allergic reaction to a bee sting October 4th, 2014, at the age of 18. 3 years later, a measure in his honor was signed into Wisconsin law to improve access to the medication and to allow trained individuals to carry and administer it through an epinephrine auto-injector.
But we turned that grief into power and energy and motivation to go out and make a difference, because no one ever should die of an allergic reaction, ever.
Culinary arts students at Fox Valley Technical College recently took one of the training and certification classes taught by Angel and her husband, George. Ian Jones is one of those students.
I think it's super important for, especially my profession with culinary, for people to be able to save people's lives. You never know whenever anything can go wrong, especially with food-related allergic reactions. Anything can happen.
He says this training fits in with the other aspects of culinary arts he is learning.
Well, we're learning a lot about being food safe and stuff like that, and how to be sanitary, so I think this ties in super well.
Work is underway to bring Dylan's Law to a much wider audience.
We are working on Dylan's Law nationwide so that any trained individual can give an epinephrine auto-injector and save a life without the fear of liability. And here in Wisconsin, we're doing it.
A decade after their son died from the reaction to a bee sting, she and George are doing all they can through training and legislation to make sure this tragedy doesn't happen to another family. In Grand Chute, Nathan Phelps, Spectrum News.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Thanks for watching. Your Spectrum News in 90 is coming up right after this short break. Stay with us.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Here's the deal. People need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
At Spectrum Enterprise, we give over 80% of the Fortune 500 the technology solutions they need to meet their growing business demands. Whether it's ultra-fast connectivity, seamless transactions, safe and secure data, or reliable always-on technology, these businesses demand better, and we're here to deliver it. Get a network you can rely on with our 100% uptime SLA guarantee. 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 100% uptime
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
Our journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices. Spectrum News Plus, local stories, connecting communities.